Welcome to my third learning demonstration, which covers green space in urban environments for the course Environmental Science 10H under Professor Flowers. So to start, again, I want to go over just a couple things for the contents, which includes the definition, effects on biodiversity and environmental health, effects on human health, and then touch on underserved people. So I want to define what a green space is to start. And the definition of a green space is a term that includes both natural ecosystems and key components of the built environment, such as public parks, greenways, gardens, and forests, as well as private yards and other natural areas. I would just want to touch on effects on biodiversity and environmental health. And there are several benefits to incorporating green spaces into urban environments, such as giving native, endangered, and migratory species a place to live, combating heat islands, and reducing air pollution. So to touch on the native, endangered, and migratory species part, I wanted to talk about monarch butterflies, because monarch butterflies migrate through California to overwinter. They rely on certain plants, milkweed, for food as they go by. And having these green spaces in cities is extremely important. Something that comes to mind is the Butterfly Sanctuary in Monterey Bay, and just green spaces for these butterflies, and by extension, other species that come through California or live in California is really important to preserve the biodiversity of the state. And I also want to talk about urban heat islands. And urban heat islands are metropolitan areas where the temperature can rise 1.8 to 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the rural areas surrounding them. And this can be deadly, especially in the summer months when temperatures due to climate change are rising. And if there's a lack of green space in these urban environments, um, it could spell bad for the animals and people within them. Like, for example, it is 10 degrees cooler in the shade. And I actually did an experiment with this last semester for my geography lab class. And just having shade in and of itself is really important, but green spaces in these urban environments will also provide habitat and a place to live for urban critters, and especially animals like birds. And for the third reason, trees will absorb carbon dioxide and other pollutants and can help to reduce noise pollution. And I didn't know actually that trees could reduce noise pollution. That was pretty cool to figure out and learn about. And trees are just so very important. They help clean out the environment, they help produce oxygen, absorb the carbon dioxide, which is prevalent in cities. And as I said again, they help to provide habitat for critters. And health benefits resulting from green spaces include a lot. The World Health Organization recommends that all people live within 984 feet of green space. And people who spend more time in nature display enhanced cognitive functioning and reduce stress. Additionally, they are less likely to develop mental health issues like anxiety and depression. And findings indicate that proximity to green spaces can help to minimize issues such as obesity and other public health problems. And for this last point, green spaces within walking distance of one's home correlate with better health outcomes, notably for homemakers, the elderly, and individuals from lower socioeconomic groups, all of whom are less likely to be physically active than others. Activity performed in natural settings also offers more benefits than those in hardscape environments. So just having these green spaces will offer people the opportunity to be active and outside, healthier, cooler, and all of this, like the slide states, has a very positive impact on people's and animals' health. And touching on, speaking of people from lower socioeconomic groups, there is a noticeable inequality regarding green spaces, especially in America. And according to the Center for American Progress's 2020 report, The Nature Gap: Confronting Racial and Economic Disparities in the Destruction and Protection of Nature in America, communities of color are 3 times more likely than white counterparts to live in areas with limited access to nature. In the contiguous United States, 74% of communities of color face a nature deficit compared to only 23% of white communities. And 70% of low-income communities face similar challenges, with a rate 28% higher than those with moderate to high incomes. And this issue is most severe for low-income communities of color. 76% of individuals in these communities live in nature-deprived areas. So this is just kind of goes further to show how America has always been centered around wealthy white people, to put it extremely bluntly. And um, I think that as we progress and improve on building cities and like growing more as a community and population, that we need to better implement green spaces evenly across the US. And yeah, as I was saying, practices such as redlining, displacement, and other income-based segregation have led to unequal distribution of green spaces. These people are also excluded from public lands and green spaces and the institutions that manage those spaces. And to kind of like add on to this terrible effect, there are a few resources that are focused at low-income communities of color. Insufficient funds can also play into this, like costs associated with travel or recreation. And even if there are parks in a low-income community of color, they aren't maintained as well as those in white communities, or they're not as big, and just generally, again, very unequal. And this isn't exactly related, but I put a picture here of Central Park in New York, kind of to talk about one community in particular. Let me put, yeah, okay. So, in around 1825 to 1857, there was a predominantly Black community living in the land that is now Central Park in New York City. And this community was called Seneca Village. And again, predominantly Black people that lived there. And they really just had the space, and it built built it built up their community and offered like support to each other. And then it basically got plowed over to make space for this park. They were given orders to just leave, and then Central Park was built on top of that village. And I believe this is a really good example of how communities of color have just been kind of blocked out from creating communities of their own, especially with the topic of segregation and stuff like that, because they're continuously getting pushed out. And in an effort to make green space for people that were not them, they got pushed out in the process. And I think it's really important to consider the history of Central Park when we look at it. And again, just to use this, just to have this sit in our minds when we think about how do we implement green spaces across America and how can we make this more equal. And just kind of touching on the health aspect of this, communities of color are much more likely to experience unhealthy air and the health issues that come with that. And I just wanted to pull up a quote. This year's State of the Air finds that the burden of living with unhealthy air is not shared equally. Although people of color make 41.2% of the overall population of the US, they are 50.2% of the community living in a county with at least one failing grade. And I also wanted to pull this quote from this book I was reading called The Color of Law. And this quote says, decisions to prevent toxic waste facilities in the African American areas did not intend to intensify slum conditions, although this was the result. The racial aspect of these choices was a desire to avoid the deterioration of white neighborhoods when African American sites were available as alternatives. And again, I think this really shows kind of the disregard for anybody who isn't white, and the prioritization of white people to have these very nice like green spaces. And again, to just think about this when we're building up new cities or adding to existing ones to make sure that everyone gets these green spaces equally. And especially when considering the fact that in 1991, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, issued a report confirming that a disproportionate number of toxic waste facilities were found in African American communities nationwide, which kind of just goes back to everything I said. So, just to kind of offer a conclusion, while green spaces in cities and other urban environments have a great multitude of benefits, it is of utmost importance that these zones are distributed equally amongst all Americans. And these are my sources. And thank you very much for listening.